What is going on, everyone? My name is Boit, and I'm back. Today, we're going to be talking about the prospect of God Powers having cooldowns in Age of Mythology Retold. We don't really have enough information to know exactly how it's going to be looking, but I've discussed with my Twitch audience and come up with several different options that they could go with, and I'm going to lay out my concerns for these potential pathways. So, to begin, let's start with exactly what we know. The article at PC Gamer states, the other huge change is in your God Powers. Rather than the one and done bolts of lightning that will never reappear in a match, those powers are now on cooldowns. It's a fundamental and huge change to how Age of Mythology plays. For Ewan and the team, those tweaks are all about making the game more fun, most importantly, more competitive 22 years later. Their hope is that this updated version will help boost the still existent competitive community and tournament scene around Age of Mythology the same way that the Definitive Edition caused Age of Empires 2's player count to skyrocket. The God Power change is both great for esports and for watching the game, said Ewan, because you know that like a key cooldown in a MOBA match, that Lightning Bolt or Meteor is coming back around soon. That anticipation makes it much more fun to watch, he said. Okay, so we know God Powers are going to be on cooldowns. We know their focus is to make the game fun and competitive. We know that they want AoM to have the success that AoE 2 had. And we know that they think this will be a plus for esports viewers. For those who are kind of new to the AoM scene and aren't really sure what the big deal is, let me unpack exactly what God Powers are and their impact on the game. Every Civ starts out in Age 1 with a fairly low power God Power. For example, there's an effect that reveals a portion of the map, there's an effect which creates a gold mine for you, and there's many other things of that sort of caliber of impact. As the game progresses, the God Powers you start to get become much stronger, from making your units nearly invincible for a couple of seconds to absolutely flattening an area of the map with an earthquake. As you can imagine, even the quote unquote low impact God Powers are also pretty damn strong. At any rate, strategies are constructed around God Powers. Timing attacks are boosted with said God Powers, and defensive tools are unlocked as well. And in the end, an incredibly easy to break ecosystem of balance remains. One such example right off the top of my head would be the interaction between Ceasefire and Frost. Both cancelling each other out, obviously. I, for one, completely understand where the developers and casual players are coming from. It's kind of sad that God Powers just sort of stopped being a thing in Age of Mythology. The gods abandon us after 15 to 20 minutes into the game. But it is not as simple as just saying, here, have more God Powers. There's nuance involved. So let's jump into some guesswork and try and construct some theories for exactly what cooldowns mean and how they could potentially approach this frankly huge design change without absolutely breaking Age of Mythology. Let's start off simple. Number one, all the God Powers are now on cooldown. This option would frankly be terrible. God Powers would simply be clicked as fast as they possibly could with no thought into getting max value because they know that it'll be back anyways, so they can just get value then. Not to mention certain God Powers breaking the late game in a really, really negative way. I'm looking at you, Plentyvault. For those of you who don't know, Plentyvault gives you resources. It's worth about 10 villages. Imagine needing less than 10 villages, and then less than 10 villages, and then less than 10 villages. And now I don't need villages. Okay. So if this on the surface is a bad idea, then how could they potentially approach this? Well, Atlantean already basically has this system. They get God Power charges, and they have cooldowns attached to it. It makes a lot of sense for them to use this system that is already there, knowing that it basically works. While this does inevitably mean that the God Powers will run out eventually, they can still easily extend their use throughout the game. They can balance the God Powers out by dishing out small amounts of charges with long cooldowns to the big bad God Powers, and giving many charges with shorter cooldowns to the weaker God Powers. My concern here is simple. Atlantean God Powers are weaker on average than the rest of the God Powers, and simply giving them more charges would not do. They would need some sort of a rework to become useful. Now, this still has the problem of use on cooldown approach. However, with a limited amount of charges, a player might need to rethink, or at least think twice before clicking the button. For example, when we look at Shockwave, while it is often used quite quickly in the game, players are still actively searching for a value way to use that God Power. They aren't just spamming it. In the end, I'm dubious if this would be a good way to approach this design change, if this really appeals to the casual audience at all. But from a competitive standpoint, I do think it could work. So this kind of ticks 2 of the 3 criteria from the interview. Moving on. God Powers have a cooldown and a cost. There's several ways this could be approached. Favor could now be a resource that is used to buy God Powers once they come off cooldown. While this makes a lot of sense, seeing as you were praying to the gods for their divine intervention, I am dubious as if this could actually work from a design perspective, because favor is already a finite resource. You are already making a decision between myth units, unique technologies, and buildings to spend this favor on, and every civilization gathers favor at a different rate. So not only does this sound like a nightmare to balance, but as for how I see it, this could potentially remove myth units and unique technologies from the game. So what if they add resources to the mix? Resources and favor to buy God Powers when they come off cooldown. First off, sacrificing food and gold, at the very least to the gods, was a somewhat common practice. So it does make sense in the AoM universe that it would grant the gods favor to some degree. However, we still have the problem of units, buildings, technologies costing this stuff, but at least now we can start pushing the cost of the God Powers higher than 100 favor by attaching a large amount of resources to it as well. So there is possibly a balance that could be struck, but it's still going to be really, really tough. Another approach could be a new resource could be introduced. Some sort of credit system where you do a task, pray to a unique temple, that is unlocked in the Mythic Age or something like that. And eventually you unlock some of the unique resource that could be used to buy a God Power. This solves the problem of it being really hard to balance the decision-making process, unlocks the God Powers to be usable for the entirety of the game, and is easy to balance because if it's too strong, you can just slow the credits down. If it's too weak, you can speed them up. A final idea which kind of stems from the new resource would be a new building. Similar to the Titan Gate, that when it's placed down, alerts you that God Powers are coming after an amount of time. This adds counterplay. For example, I can go and kill the building. You alert your opponent that it is coming, so it isn't just a straight surprise that your opponent hits you with a second Ragnarok. And it's super easy to balance. My personal opinion is that the Wonder would be a perfect building for this. It doesn't have to be a Wonder, but it would be a great option. You could possibly use a god statue or a unique temple building of some sort for this to be a thing. Okay, third option. God Powers refresh based on how many kills you get in the game. This is a sort of a fun idea from the Mythodia scenario, which if you haven't played, I do recommend. It's an absolute hoot. Personally, I don't think this would be a very good idea from a competitive standpoint because of how snowbally it would be. AoM's already kind of a snowbally game, so trying to keep that in check would be for the best. Option number 4. Special objectives get added in. Think Warcraft 3. Think Stormgate. Fighting mighty monsters to win over the gods sounds as romantic as yelling GG at your monitor after you've grinded out a win against the waves of Ra-mercs for the past hour. But this isn't those games, and AoM already achieves what these games are trying to do naturally. Instead of needing to leave your base to go and kill some mob, You leave your base to go and get resources. You leave your base to secure a trade route. You leave your base to secure settlements. I think this is actually one of the shining features of Age of Mythology and Age of Empires as a whole. And stepping away from that into the Warcraft 3 universe would be a huge mistake. If I wanted to fight an NPC, I'd play single player. Option number 5. Big god powers are a one-off. Small god powers are repeatable. This really doesn't sound like what the article was talking about. They want to see the huge moments of meteors crashing multiple times in a game. Limiting this to just small GPs like Bolt and Undermine seems like a little bit underwhelming. 6. A new game mode is introduced. Do you remember Lightning? Super fast game mode for only the most intense little green dinosaurs out there. I jest. But there is a world where this talk is about a game mode they're introducing, which is aimed at the more casual space, while they still leave the original design in there for the competitive players to play. This would show very, very little faith in their system to be competitive though, and I imagine that the serious players wouldn't even bother with it, which would create a huge divide between the competitive and the casual players, of which I personally don't want, and I'm sure they don't want either. Option number 7. Relics now have god powers attached to them in some way, shape, or form. It's probably the most far-fetched of all the ideas. However, all the unique relics would need to go away, and we would see a more Age of Empires 2 style relic system, of which the speed at which your god powers would be recharging would be tied to how many relics you get. This isn't an awful idea, but there are serious balance problems, such as Atlantean being able to claim 3 heroes out incredibly early to just claim all the relics, or Egyptian being able to claim the relics for the cost of scouting with their pharaoh. One thing's for sure, I would be skipping hunting dogs as Greek and Norse and trying to get my heroes out as fast as I humanly could to grab those relics. As a bit of an aside here, one thing I think Age of Mythology did really well with their relics was to make them important, but not too strong. This meant that as an Egyptian player, you had to weigh up losing your empower time to go and pick up the relics, or as relatives paying for the hero delay in getting them to the fight until the relic is put in the temple. Changing this feature would be a little bit disappointing to me. Okay, that's all we've managed to come up with. What do you think is going to happen with the god powers? Do you think this is going to be a positive thing for Age of Mythology esports? In the end, I think that if they treat it with care, balance it nicely, it has potential to find a place that won't ruin the game. My name's Boit, and I'll leave you with one final thought. If I can get multiple Son of Osirises, can I get multiple Titans?